So tonight we're delighted to welcome Paul McAleavey as our speaker. He's going to be advocating taking the high road to Scotland's environment post-Brexit. So this is going to be about the potential degradation of the environment, which is one of the many threats brought to us courtesy of Brexit. Paul has fantastic experience and expertise in the environmental field in Scotland and the EU. He spent almost 30 years working for the European Union, originally from Clackmannanshire. Paul has held senior positions in the field of environment at the European Commission in Brussels and at the European Environment Agency in Copenhagen. He's currently advisor at the Joint Research Centre, the Science and Knowledge Service for Policymaking at the European Commission. Paul also sits as a board member on Environmental Standards Scotland, the independent body set up by the Scottish Parliament fairly recently, post-Brexit, to ensure the effectiveness of environmental law and prevent enforcement gaps arising from the UK leaving the European Union. Paul will draw on his professional experience, but he'll be speaking to Yes We You tonight in a purely personal capacity. So anyway, it looks and it sounds fascinating. So thank you for speaking to us tonight, Paul. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Morag, and thanks for the invitation. I'm delighted to join you. I'm actually sitting in the office here in Brussels in the European Commission, I'm very grateful to have the chance to speak to you. When I had a quick pre-chat with Morag and Elise, we were playing with the idea for what to call this. You know, avoiding a race to the bottom, how to guarantee a green Brexit. But I was quite keen on Take the High Road, just showing my age, because it allows me to show that image from the STV program, which was on when I was a school kid back in Alloa many years ago. But I promise not to draw the Take the High Road analogy too far. Thanks, Morag, for your kind words about my professional background, and as I've underlined there, I am speaking in a personal capacity. So what I'm about to say doesn't in any way commit the opinions of either Environmental Standards Scotland, on which I'm a board member, or the European Commission. It also allows me to speak a lot more freely by saying that I'm speaking in a personal capacity. One other thing to say, I presume you're not interested in the minutiae of environment policy, so I'm going to take quite a broad brush approach. Let me just move this forward. Now So there's 4 questions that I wanted to put on the table for discussion, and there they are. What are EU environmental standards? Why do they matter? Is there a Brussels effect, and which effectively means that irrespective of whether Brexit well, it did happen, but irrespective of Brexit, that Brussels will in any case continue to have quite a strong effect on regulatory globalisation, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I'll say some words about Scotland's approach to trying to match progress and keep pace with the EU post-Brexit, and then I'll share some thoughts about opportunities and threats on the road ahead. I think the first question and the third question are quite empirical. The second and the third one, they're a bit more sort of theoretical and personal opinion. But I hope when we come to the questions, and that I give you some food for thought there. Moving on then. This is a messy big snake diagram, which I borrowed from some of my ex-colleagues at the European Environment Agency. And you don't need to look at the detail of it. Effectively, it's showing that European environment policy has been around for quite a long time now. I added the text there on red when the UK joined the EEC as it was then, on the single market and on Brexit, because I'd like to make some observations here. So the snake starts back in 1968. Happens to be the year I was born, but the issue there, the Apollo Earthrise photograph was often seen as a key moment in environmental awareness when that image was taken. Some people say that environmental awareness was dated in its modern sense from earlier in the 60s and Rachel Carson's publication of Silent Spring. But in any case, what I want to draw your attention to is the Stockholm Conference from 1972 on the human environment. In a couple of months' time, it's the 50th anniversary of that conference, which was really the first time that environment policy was put on the agenda as an international issue. And it's round about that time that countries first started to set up environment ministries within their national governments. And it was then that the UK joined the common market as it was then. So the UK and the birth of European environmental policy happened round about the same time. You'll see that the UK then was involved through the first waves. It was involved in the setting up of the European Environment Agency. It was a member of the European Environment Agency from when the day it opened in '94 until the UK left on the 31st of January 2020. And by the time that it left, the UK had been part of adopting over 200 pieces of legislation, what's called the acquis, the body, if you like, of environmental policy rules, legal acts covering water, air, waste, nature protection, industrial pollution, GMOs. We could go on, but there's a big acquis which the UK had implemented when it got to the time of leaving in January 2020. But there's a point up there at the top that I'd like to highlight for you, which you might not automatically think of when you're thinking about EU environmental standards, and that's the single market, the Single European Act from '86, and then the entrance into force of the single market. One of the things when I first started working with EU environmental standards that I learned quite quickly was that the rules are often based on the internal market provisions of the treaty. So that means that there's an expectation of harmonized standards. So without going into the legal jargon, it effectively means that countries need to apply the same standards when it comes to quite a lot of products, or when it comes to additives, or when it comes to certain chemicals, so that goods can flow freely through the single market. So while the environmental objectives set minimum standards, you can go higher if you like, the single market tends to set harmonized standards. So everybody needs to have the same approach. And I'll come back to that because I think it's important when we're looking at what's happening now in terms of trade and cooperation, what I'm going to refer to as the Brussels effect, and also the continued access that both sides of the trade and cooperation agreement say that they want. Before I do that, though, just a flashback for some of the older ones here. When you might remember that the UK at one point was called the dirty man of Europe in the 1970s and 1980s. In the early years of UK membership, it didn't have the greatest of reputations when it came to the environment. And if you go back and look at it, the reason was that the UK was seen as dragging its heels on some major pieces of legislation. On the left there's a picture of acid rain damaged forests in Scandinavia. And the UK at the time was one of the slower member states in cutting its air pollutant emissions, which were travelling across the North Sea and contributing to acid rain in Scandinavia. And that was one of the reasons that sort of tardiness that the UK picked up the label of being the dirty man of Europe. And the other one there on the right-hand side is urban wastewater treatment plants, sewage. And again, for those of you who were around at that time, you would remember the debate there as well. Jonathan Porritt was the director of Friends of the Earth, and he gave a very important lecture there in 1989 on the subject of the dirty man of Europe. And his conclusion was, yeah, the UK is a dirty man of Europe, but it's not the only one. At that time, it was one of the dirty men. I think it's fair to say that things probably started to change in the 1990s, a personal opinion here, but when the change of government at UK level in 1997 and the major investments that were made in infrastructure, including in sewage infrastructure, the reputation slowly cleared up. But not to make a party political point, I think it was also the case that even back in the 80s, the UK was starting to be seen to take a lead on issues around ozone, for example, and the Montreal Protocol to try and fix the problems of the hole in the ozone layer. But back to this slide, just to say to you, the key point I want to leave you with on this snake, as I called it, was that the UK left the European Union at precisely the moment that the European Union made a step change when it came to its level of ambition. So after the 2019 European Parliament elections and the Commission, which came in there under Ursula von der Leyen, the European Green Deal was put on the table. And I'd like to say a couple of things about the Green Deal, because it really is a massive boost, I think, in any objective sense, to the level of ambition for environmental protection and environmental standards. It's really become mainstream. So the point of that diagram is, after 50 years of the UK being a party to this, it left at exactly the moment when the ambition level went very, very high. I'm going to click on this quite a few times because I couldn't take off the animation. You don't need to worry about all the detail. But the fact, how do I go back on this? There it's there. Yeah. Good. Yeah. The European Green Deal is effectively a program which basically sets out Europe's climate ambition, a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990 levels by 2030. And there's also the fact that the war in Ukraine and the pressure on energy is actually leading to demands by many member states to actually accelerate this transition in order to reduce energy dependence upon Russian fossil fuels. There's ambitions to raise the bar when it comes to zero pollution from air, chemicals, and water. High level of ambition on biodiversity, high level of ambition on food, transport, buildings, and industry. And I think something I'd like to draw your attention to is those two blue boxes at the bottom there. One is the concept of a just transition. There's a very clear understanding that sometimes environmental protection has distributional consequences, and we need to factor that into account and respect that, and make sure that we also have the support measures to make sure that nobody's left behind. Which links to the other blue box, which is on the financing of the transition. And just to give you a sense of the scale of what the European Green Deal means, coming out of the pandemic, and when the European Commission was able to borrow on financial markets for the first time on behalf of the European Union, we created a next generation EU recovery plan. 1.8 trillion euro. And the key point here is that 1/3 of that money, which is being spent in the member states, is being used to support initiatives under the Green Deal. So it's not just that the level of ambition is high, it's also the fact that there is financial backing to support that level of ambition. And as I say, the events in Ukraine and the brutal wars by Russia on Ukraine is actually, if anything, accelerating this process. Moving on from the EU standards, this isn't something that's just part of a European debate, a race to the bottom or a race to the top. Some of you might have heard of this, the California effect or the Delaware effect. Delaware is famous in the US for being a corporate haven, if you like, with very low or non-existent transaction taxes for business. And many corporations are set up in Delaware. Whereas there's also a discussion around something called the California effect, that the sheer scale and size of California and its sheer weight in terms of the market that it represents within the US, what tends to happen in California can create an effect, a ripple effect, that influences the rest of the actions on the market, or sometimes in policy in the rest of the US. A clear example there was air pollution and air quality, where California has been in the lead. And the reason that I mention that is it gives me the opportunity to talk about this thing called the Brussels effect, which I just wanted to put on the table and to just offer it for some discussion. Ignore the subtitle of the book there. It's by a law professor in Columbia University, Anu Bradford, a half Finnish, half US citizen. The subtitle there, How the European Union Rules the World. I think it's slightly provocative, but she has a very interesting approach to this, effectively saying, you know, okay, Brussels for shorthand is often criticized as being weak when it comes to speaking with one voice on the global stage and for foreign policy. Until very, very recently, it had a very limited military or defense capacity. But what she argues in her book, and which is quite often referred to, is the sheer size of the market that the internal market represents, and the level of ambition and the fact that the access conditions are quite closely policed by the European Union, means that there is what she calls a reality of unilateral regulatory globalization. And by that she means that the European Union is effectively seeing that its laws and regulations are being adopted in other parts of the world, for the simple reason that many companies just want to have one approach, so they approximate their operations to the highest standards, rather than having different standards for different markets. So her hypothesis is that she wrote an article recently in the US press saying that whether, sorry, let me rephrase that. She wrote an article in the US press saying that even if we're talking about regulatory sovereignty and taking back control, and that the UK will not be a rule taker, there will be, because of the sheer size of the market and the importance of the market access conditions, a Brussels effect. And the Brussels effect won't just happen in the UK, but it's something which happens globally. And she looks at that not just in terms of the environment, but in terms of privacy, privacy legislation, privacy on the internet. She looks at it in terms of GMOs. She looks at it in terms of chemicals. So there is a question there. Is the Brussels effect something that in any case will happen anyway? Before turning specifically to Scotland, I'll just take a look at the clock here. Yeah. Before turning specifically to Scotland, I wanted to share this with you. This is a map of participation in the European Environment Agency network. So, you know, I used to work there, and we had a network of literally thousands of experts across 38 countries. Until the 31st of January 2020, we would have the UK filled in. The UK reported, Scotland as part of the UK reported on its air quality, noise, biodiversity, climate, all of the factors that the European Environment Agency was tracking to look at progress. And then on the 1st of February, I have to say, again, speaking personally, my heart sank when we published that map with the UK, shaded out. And at the moment, that's how it still is. The UK could have chosen during the negotiations between 2016 and 2019 to request to stay on as a member of some of the agencies, but it didn't. And we ended up with a Brexit which was harder than had been promised at the beginning. And it therefore means that at the minute, the mechanisms that were previously in place to track progress and see whether there was a divergence or no divergence, as the Trade and Cooperation Agreement says there should be, whether that is the case, because at the moment the UK is not reporting on its previous commitments internationally. So that brings me to Environmental Standards Scotland. So what happened in the Continuity Act was that the Scottish Parliament decided to set up a body called Environmental Standards Scotland. It was created by the legislation in Christmas 2020, and it was acting as a shadow body through most of last year. As I've said a couple of times, I sit as a member of the board of Environmental Standards Scotland to try and not least help make that link between the EU level and ESS. It's a new body. It's independent. It's non-ministerial, and it reports ultimately to the Scottish Parliament. And I wouldn't say that Environmental Standards Scotland takes on all of the tasks that the European Commission or the Court of Justice had before Brexit. It's not a complaints body, for example. ESS doesn't deal with individual complaints, but it does look at compliance and effectiveness of environmental law and policy in Scotland, and it is independent in its ability to do so. And one of the key tasks of Environmental Standards Scotland is to keep track of what's happening in the rest of Europe and internationally to ensure that Scotland continues to keep pace with environmental standards. And the word keeping pace are explicitly mentioned in ESS's strategy. One other thing to mention about ESS, I don't want to spend too much time here because I don't want to talk too long, but under Article 395, for those of you who are geeks who like to look into this type of thing, Article 395 of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement between the UK and the EU, there was a forum which was established, a forum for cooperation, monitoring and enforcement, where ESS, together with the English equivalent, the Office for Environmental Protection, and the body which has been established in Wales and in Northern Ireland for the same purposes, would meet regularly with the European Commission to track the fact that there was no divergence between what had been agreed prior to the Trade and Cooperation Agreement and what effectively has happened since. The Article 395 forum hasn't met yet. I think that probably has something to do with difficulties elsewhere in the ongoing discussions between the UK and the EU, possibly not least on Northern Ireland. So my last slide, and thanks for your patience. I just wanted to put some issues on the table here, some opportunities and threats on the road ahead, as it were. The first opportunity I would mention is that clearly keeping pace is an opportunity for people in terms of people's health. Why should the health standards which are established in the European Union not be the same level of health standards which are public health standards which are for people in Scotland? And likewise, as the planet, as the ambition level of the Green Deal is so high, how can we make sure that we have the same level of ambition in Scotland? And likewise, it's profitable. The evidence shows that companies which adopt higher standards are profitable in the longer term. I've put there the subject of the UK Internal Market Act. There, as you know, the UK Parliament legislated last year to avoid, sorry, I've got the text here, the legislation enshrined the principle of mutual recognition to ensure compliance with regulation in one part of the UK is accepted as compliance elsewhere. I think that it's obviously a really important piece of legislation, which is, I think the implications of it will still need to be seen in the coming years. But the interesting question will be if different parts of the United Kingdom decide that they want to keep pace at different at different speeds, if you like. So how the systems interplay between the, let's call it the Holyrood effect of what the ambition level is in Holyrood, what the ambition level is in Westminster, and what the ambition level in Brussels is, that is still to be seen in practice. It's still very early days. And as I said in the bullet point before that, there's been some discussion about a chill factor. And what that means is, would there be a risk that one part of the United Kingdom would be reluctant to legislate in a particular area, even if the EU was doing it, if it potentially created an internal market barrier within the UK? At the moment, as far as I'm aware, these are mostly theoretical discussions, but they're definitely issues which are on the road ahead. And to finish on two final bullet points here before I at last allow you to ask some questions. A positive agenda. Several of the pioneers of EU environment policy have come from smaller member states. Sweden really pushed on chemicals legislation. Austria was very active in the GMO discussion. I won't go through all of the details, but it's often been smaller member states who've had a high level of ambition, who've been able to Europeanize their level of ambition and make it a level of ambition which was common across the EU. And as a Scot, and speaking as a Scot, I would certainly hope that the level of ambition in Scotland would be to be a pioneer, influencing also the level of ambition in the EU. And the last point, and again, this is an extremely political point, so I'm again making it in a personal capacity. But if ever the discussion is on the table about re-accession or membership of the EU, there are 35 chapters which any applicant country needs to show that it's satisfied the conditions for membership, and chapter 27 is the environment chapter. So if someday down the road Scotland were to apply, on January 2020, we know that Scotland was fully in compliance with Chapter 27 of the Acquis. And I think the political issue is going forward, if the EU level of ambition is high and is increasing, how do you make sure that the compliance with the conditions of membership also there don't fall behind? As I say, and this is my final word, it's a bit too early to draw conclusions. The Environmental Standards Scotland has just been established, and the Internal Market Act in the UK I think it's really only now entering into effect as well. But those are some of the issues that I wanted to leave you with to open up discussion. And I thank you for your patience in listening to me for so long. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. That was, yes, really interesting. I've learned an awful lot. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to David and Leslie now, who are going to be posing some of the questions that we're being asked.
Hi, thanks for that, Morag, and thanks very much, Paul. That's a fascinating talk. So the benefit of asking questions is you can abuse the process and ask your own. So I have a question for you posed by your presentation. You showed us a very sad looking map of the European continent with the only countries who are not either a member of the European Environment Agency or at the very least cooperating with it, marked as the UK and Kaliningrad, which of course is a Russian enclave. Not sure that's great company for us to be in. Could you perhaps describe to us what practical impact does the UK not cooperating with the European Environment Agency have on decisions and reporting and progress and so on in the UK? And would there be any potential for the Scottish Environment Agency to cooperate on a subnational scale?
How do you want to take the questions one by one? So one question, one answer. I think it's definitely easier for me. Okay. Yeah. I would say that the issues primarily for the UK not participating with the European Environment Agency are at least threefold. One is the ability to benchmark and to say, okay, we're using the same measurement tools, we're using the same yardstick. And there was a lot of talk, of course, back in 2016 of having a green Brexit and going beyond EU standards. One question is, how do you know if you're not actually measuring according to the same yardstick and standards in some of the areas that you were previously? I think a second issue is the ability to shape legislation downstream. Now, the European Environment Agency's job is not to shape legislation. It's a knowledge and information provider, but in doing so, it is probably the main information provider to the Environment Department of the European Commission. So that sort of withdrawal from the upstream information that goes into shaping the policy process, I would feel is a missed opportunity. And a third area, I guess, the sharing of information and technical expertise on specific standards. One of the things in that snake was Copernicus, which is the satellite technology. Increasingly, environmental monitoring is being done from remote sources. And there's a whole community developing around standards on how you achieve that. And so I think not being part of that is I think it's a missed opportunity. Your specific question on SEPA, there's a political answer and there's a bureaucratic answer. The political answer is no. I mean, it's member states who participate in the European Environment Agency and its network. However, the more bureaucratic answer is that the environmental protection agencies across Europe have an informal network between themselves, which is the secretariat of which is hosted out of the European Environment Agency in Copenhagen. And SEPA has been and has continued since Brexit to be an active participant in that more informal network.
Okay.
Thank you. I think we'll go to Jo Goodburn next because she put her hand up very quickly after the end of the talk. So would you like to ask your question, Jo? Jo?
Yes, thanks, Leslie. Yes, thank you very much. Great to see you, Paul. Thank you. That was a really great overview. I was particularly drawn by your last slide. I was just trying to formulate a great long question in the chat box, but I think the bullet points you raised there are so vital for the future of environment in Scotland, particularly the internal market bill. I think is very scary in terms of how a devolved government can keep a pace with Brussels while we're part of that very different internal market. But how do we keep a pace is my key question. There's obviously there's Scotland House. There are Scottish officials out in Brussels. There will be Scottish officials back here doing their very best to keep up. As you say, some of the existing Scottish environmental agencies like SEPA will stay in line with some of the more informal networks. But what do you think we could be doing as sort of pro-EU campaigners to be pushing for help with this? Because we, as you say, we have to keep the acquis in line if we can, and it's just from all my years doing environment in the council, you know, water, air, all of these things don't respect national boundaries, and the other EU member states realise that. So what can we do to ensure that we're not going to be in the rooms anymore? What's the best way for us to try to get help, would you say, from the Brussels side?
Hi, Joe. I don't think I'm giving away any data protection rules when I said Joe and I have known each other for about three decades, working in different parts. Joe mostly in the council, and then mostly in the commission. Yeah, I mean, maybe a couple of things to pick up on, Joe. I mean, the first thing you raised is deeply political. The Internal Market Act, and if you've got so long as you've got the different governments in the constituent parts of the UK broadly on the same line, I think it can work. But if you have one part, okay, if the UK government decides to go for a heavily deregulatory agenda, it makes it incredibly difficult for Scotland to stick to what it committed to, the Scottish Parliament committed to under the Continuity Act. And the Continuity Act, as you know, wasn't just for the environment, it was also for animal welfare, for public health and various other issues where the Scottish Government said, look, we're going to keep pace, at least until 2030, and then we'll review it in 2030. As I say, there was talk that maybe on chemicals that there might be a deregulatory approach from the UK government. It hasn't yet materialised. If it did, that would be a real issue, because then Scotland's ability to still respect the REACH provisions would be challenged, to say the least. How do you do it? Yeah, you can answer that question as well as I can. But I mean, I think I'm reassured that Environmental Standards Scotland are intending to come over to Brussels now. Now that the pandemic seems to be dying down, it's opening up, and the chair and some of the colleagues from Environmental Standards Scotland are looking to come over to consult on their interim strategy. Sorry, the full strategy. By October, Environmental Standards Scotland needs to lay its strategy before the Scottish Parliament, and one of the elements of it is how we keep pace. So they're coming over to speak to partners here in Brussels, hopefully in the summer, to just get the information, set up the relationships, and make sure that as developments are happening here, that they're on top of them, and if possible, even ahead of them. So I would stop there. I'm taking too long in my answers. But,
Okay, thanks, Paul. So Lynn Copland posed a question in the chat. Lynn, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hello, my name's Lynn Copeland. I'm just wondering if the EU standards of testing potable water supplies and wastewater supplies were still being upheld. I know it's a fairly technical kind of question.
yeah.
So you know, there are, I think it's the microbiological examination of potable water supplies. There was a thing called the Blue Book, and it was all of the EU standards within the one handbook, and all the methods, protocols, etc., reporting conditions and so on, were all included. And I just wondered if the laboratories and all the other sort of agencies involved in the analysis of water were still adhering to the EU standards.
Okay, I'm not an expert on the testing of drinking water, but I can answer at the level of principle and give two answers. One is that it's the outcome which is important. So the commitment is to the quality, if you see what I mean, rather than the particular means to achieve it. So I think the focus would be on the outcomes of the monitoring rather than the mechanics of it. But that having been said, and this is my second point, it goes quite closely together, and it was part of what I tried to say in an earlier answer on standards. One of the things that the EU does, the European Commission actually serves as often a reference laboratory, so that there can be calibration between the techniques. It happens very much in air quality, which I know better than I know drinking water. And I do not believe that calibration of the precise methodologies will be happening to the same extent that it did before.
Okay, that's fine. It's just that we're all fairly conscious of the fact that water will in fact be the new oil. You know, the water standard in Scotland has been exceptionally high. You know, everybody talks about the quality of the water. So I was just, just keen to know that we were still, keeping up with the standards that were applied with the EU prior to Brexit. So thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you. Can we go to Sam now from the team? And somebody's asked if people who are asking the questions can put their cameras on, because for the people who are hard of hearing, it's easier for them to follow the questions.
Okay. Hi, Paul. I'm just concerned about the actual funding, because I know that the EU has got lots, as you mentioned in your talk, giving lots of money for all of these new ways of reducing carbon emissions. And Scotland is going to have a huge bill to try to retrofit lots of leaky homes. And so my question was about the Shared Prosperity Fund is a fraction of what we used to get from the EU. And I'm just wondering how the Scottish government can be expected to reduce fuel poverty in deprived areas if they don't have the money behind it.
Yeah, I agree with your question. I mean, I don't have an answer to that, Sam. But I mean, yeah, clearly, I noticed myself having worked on the past in the structural funds, the reduction that was coming through. Yeah, I noticed it. Yeah, clearly. But I mean, I would say generally, the tone of your question, I would just maybe react to one element of it, which is the fact that I don't necessarily see that the investments as such should be seen as a cost. They should be seen as an investment, because most of these investments are highly profitable and generate returns pretty quickly. So yeah, I agree with your question. I don't have an answer.
Well, just would like to add that one of the big issues is we don't have the skills craftsmen to do all of these retrofitting, particularly on external and internal wall insulation.
Yeah,
I guess they have thought about that in the EU, but not here, not in the UK. Yeah. Okay, thank you anyway.
Thanks, Sam. Right, so Bill Roger has posted a number of questions in the chat, but so Bill, do you want to unmute and put your camera on and try and boil that down to one question if you can?
That's a bit of a challenge. Well, can I just summarize my questions then? Because they are quite different areas. One of them was really building on what Sam was asking about with financing, and it was whether there was any provision whatsoever in the Green Deal for third country participation in programmes, given that a lot of environmental impacts cross borders. I think the other one was probably struggling to read my own typing here. Yeah, how does the Environmental Standards Scotland body report to Holyrood? If you could tell us a bit more about the mechanics of that, and I think the third one was you mentioned the fact that UK government has declared an interest to go beyond EU standards. Do you think that's feasible in some areas, perhaps, which might be the short window? Could you imagine that we get a lot of coverage, and while other areas are perhaps more likely to slip back? So could that be a bit of a curate's egg? And I think my final question was whether the Environmental Standards Scotland body has any lobbying role in Brussels. And I should stop there.
Yeah, I'll try and answer them quickly. Bill, I mean, to take the first one first, and I'm going to give quite a political answer here, but no is the answer. And why would the European Union do that for the UK, for the West Balkan countries and countries who've expressed an intention that they want to accede to the European Union. For the countries in Central Europe, for the Eastern neighbourhood, for the countries along the Northern Mediterranean, and particularly for the countries in the West Balkans, yes, there's money available. Of course, there's money available. But I mean, to just call it for what it was, I mean, the UK chose to withdraw and make itself a competitor. So why would the European Union then give finance to the UK under those circumstances? So no, I don't imagine scenarios whereby there would be any significant funding for Green Deal activities travelling from Brussels to the UK. On the other point about would a green Brexit be possible, that was Michael Gove. I don't know if you remember at the time, he was Secretary of State for DEFRA at the time when he was campaigning in the 2016 referendum, and he made many speeches saying we need to get out so that we can have higher standards. We'll have a green Brexit. Theoretically, of course, it's possible, yeah. But you know, whether it would happen UK wide, I don't know. The tone for the discussion on Brexit the Ministry for Brexit Opportunities and Government Efficiencies tends to be a bit more sort of deregulatory than aiming for higher standards, is my own, again, personal opinion. But there's nothing that would make it impossible mechanically. On ESS, on the lobbying point, that's easy. No, ESS does not lobby. It will not lobby in Brussels, and it will not lobby the Scottish Government. It's an independent body which needs to have its own gravitas, if you like. And maybe just to say a bit more about how it will work, it's open for public, so anybody can get in touch with the ESS. As I say, it doesn't deal with complaints, but it looks at patterns of non-compliance. It looks at where there are clearly issues of effectiveness, and then it has a number of tools at its disposal. It can write to the Scottish Government or other public bodies in Scotland and ask for information about what's been done. It can issue what's called compliance notices. So it can actually then say, you know, we think this needs to be addressed in order for you to comply. Another level up, it can issue to the Scottish Government improvement reports. If the legislation is fundamentally not fit for purpose, ESS, according to the legislation, can say to the Scottish Government, you need to improve this legislation to keep pace, to comply to, and then the Scottish Government needs to write to to submit to the Scottish Parliament an improvement note on how it intends to deal with the recommendations of Environmental Standards Scotland. And ultimately, ESS can get involved in judicial review. So we report to the Parliament. We do an annual report to the Parliament. This is our first year of operation since vesting, but that's effectively how it will work, Bill.
Thank you very much. I'm aware that the current UK agriculture and fisheries guy does keep saying green Brexit, so that's not going away.
Thank you. I think that we'll come to Morag next because she had her question right near the top, or right at the top, should I say.
Thanks, Leslie. Actually, I'm going to ask a different question from what I put in the box, but I hope you don't mind. Really relating to what you were just saying, Paul, about you know, that there is a degree of public engagement. Anyone can contact the Environmental Standards Scotland with concerns. I was just wondering, I mean, to what extent do you encourage public engagement? And actually, sort of wider than that, is there any kind of educational role for ESS? Just basically on the principle that environmental protection, in a sense, is everybody's responsibility. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Thanks.
The ESS is, they're really very, very keen to engage with the public. So they're trying to signal they're open for business. As I say, the legislation was given royal assent at the beginning of last year, and it was almost record time when the body was established on the 1st of October, and now it's gone through its recruitment processes to build up to its full complement. They have a website. I can share the slides with you, but in the website there's actually a link there on how to get in touch. They can't and don't intend to deal with individual complaints, but they have a strategy of what's called signposting. So if you have a complaint about a particular local issue and the ESS can't deal with it, they'll signpost you onto the people who can deal with it. And there's also an interest in ESS for doing that, because over time you can see where the issues are. So then you start to build up a picture of where people are feeling that there's issues of compliance, or there's issues of effectiveness. My understanding of the latest timetable is that sometime early June or in June, over the course of the summer, ESS will issue its strategy for consultation. So there'll be a full public consultation. They'll do, I think, a 12-week consultation over the course of the summer, so that they can then finalise the strategy to lay it before the Parliament as a draft on the 1st of October. So, and they want people to comment on it. They want all organisations, individuals to comment. It'll be a full public consultation. And then on the specific point about education, I don't think it's particularly part of the remit of ESS as something explicit, but it's definitely implicit, because by going out and talking to people about, effectiveness and what's working and where are the compliance issues, I think there is a real public awareness raising element of that. But it's an indirect issue. It's not the primary focus of ESS. But that might be something to actually respond to also in the context of the consultation.
Thanks for that, Paul. So just looking at the clock, I'm afraid we're moving towards the top of the hour very rapidly. So we'll make this the last question. And in the interest of time, I'm going to paraphrase one from the chat. Actually, one from one of our members, Kyle, who's based in the United States. And he asks, if I paraphrase a little bit, are there any already existing green industries in Scotland that Scotland could be emphasising and setting an example to the rest of the world with?
That's a question to me, because, yeah. Certainly in the renewable sector, in the marine sector, in the tidal sector there, I think Scotland has some very, very impressive capacities there. Talking in terms of political sloganizing, wasn't there a Scottish politician who said that Scotland could become the Saudi Arabia of renewables at one point? So I do think there's a really, really strong basis there to build on. And also in some of the biotech industry as well. I think Scotland has some real competitive advantages there. So yeah, it goes back to the point I made, and as this is probably the last intervention I'll make, so I'll say it again. The point I made on my final slide about, yeah, why not have a high level of ambition and be a pioneer? I mean, Scotland and some people in Scotland often compare Scotland to the Nordic countries, and the Nordic countries have been at the forefront, as I said, of much of the progress that they've put it in place domestically in their own countries, and then they've brought it to Europe, and they've persuaded Europe to Europeanize that level of ambition. And again, speaking as a Scot and speaking as somebody who's the privilege to be a European official, I would love to see Scotland leading the way and having a high level of ambition and being a pioneer, and things that were being showcased in Scotland finding their way into the European agenda and becoming part of that Brussels effect down the line.
Thank you so much, Paul, for finishing on a high note, on the high road. That's really good. Thanks very much. Yeah, so we're coming to the end of the event, I think, and we hope that you've enjoyed it and found it inspiring. And if you have, get in touch. I've just put in the chat, I've just put all our details of Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. So send us a message if you are on social media, and also our website has lots of information about what we do, and there's a link there to join us. We would love to welcome new members, so you can download a membership form from the website. And I'd like very much to thank you, Paul, for your time tonight, and for your commitment to our cause. And we'd like to thank everybody who's been here tonight, and hope to see you again on another of our event in the future. And I don't think I've forgotten anything, but if my colleagues want to put in a word, please come in at this point.
Just thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks ever so much, Paul, and thanks to everybody who's taken part. Really appreciate your participation and your questions. So do join us again in future. Thank you.